All right, let's take a look at our chapter 4 notes, population. We talked about a lot of this already. Number 1, population is one of our vocabulary words that we had last week, and it's a group of organisms of the same species that live in the same area. Populations will come together to create communities. Population growth can be either linear or exponential, or logistic. Linear growth is when I have a standard unit added each time. A really good example is that is if I make $10 an hour. Every hour, I'm going to add 10 to that. And the graph that is created by that is a straight line. Another example of that is if I have $50 into my savings account every single week on Wednesday, it's going to be increased by 50 at that time. All right, so it's a certain unit at a certain time that's added. That's linear. The other type of growth is exponential growth, and something gets large really fast. If an organism has 10 offspring, and then those 10 have 100, and then those 100 have 1,000, and those 1,000 have 10,000, that's growing at a very fast rate. This creates a J-shaped graph, and it shows what how population can grow without limits. Here's a great example of that J-shaped graph. It can be wide like this, or it can go up very, very quickly. But if you see a J-shaped graph like that, that means the population is growing very, very quickly and must have a lot of their environmental factors that are supporting it. Here's an example of our linear graph and our exponential graph. Populations cannot grow exponentially forever, and the reasons for that is that we have environmental factors that are going to limit it, such things as amount of food, diseases, predators, lack of space, competition. There'll be a lot of other things that are going to come into play that are going to stop those populations from growing like crazy. When a population is limited, the graph starts to begin to change. Your J graph starts to balance off into an S graph. And that S graph is called the logistic growth graph. And this top part right here, we call our carrying capacity at this line here. This is our exponential growth. This is our logistical growth. Here's some examples of each one of those. You have those in your notes. This is more like our deer population. When we did the O deer, you go up and down depending on what the factors are that are there and the competition that's going on. I said at that very top part of our S graph that is called our carrying capacity. And this is the actual numbers of organisms that a population can have at any given time based on the environmental factors there that can support it. The interesting thing about your carrying capacity is that it's never going to stay nice and straight like this. It's going to go up and down. It's going to hover around that line. And the reason it's going to hover around that line is populations tend to overshoot their carrying capacity and then they crash back down. And this pattern of overshooting and crashing will continue until it hovers right around that area. Some of those factors that can cause that to happen are starvation, accidents, pollution, old age, disease, predation. It's all going to affect where that carrying capacity is. Here's a great example of a graph of carrying capacity, and we overshoot and we crash, overshoot and we crash. And that's how it works based on the environmental factors. Life history patterns was one of our vocabulary words, and life history patterns is the reproductive patterns of an organism. And they depend on the environment in which the species is evolved. They tend to have different life history patterns based on their environment. For example, if their environment is changeable and unpredictable, then we have what's called a rapid life history pattern. And these organisms usually have a small body size. They mature quickly. They reproduce early in life, and they have a very short lifespan. Now, in environments that are stable, we usually have a slow life history pattern. These organisms usually have a larger body size. They mature slowly, reproduce later in life, and have a long lifespan. Here's a great example of as these organisms get larger, they live longer. And it has different examples of all kinds of different ones in here. The type of life history pattern depends on the environment that the organism lives in. Whether it's stable, unpredictable, changes a lot. And many species have characteristics of both rapid and slow, which makes a lot of sense so that they can survive. Organisms can be dispersed differently within their environments, and the dispersal is how they are found. They can either be random, where they're all over the place, uniform, where they're in nice little neat rows, or clumped together. They are going to be in these patterns based on the different environmental factors that are there. So we have random, like this here, clumped, where they stay in groups, and even. How these densities are going to be is going to not be equal. Certain factors will determine how well individual survives, and these factors may be influenced by population density or not. And remember, population density is the number of individuals in an area. So we can have density dependent. That means it's dependent on the number of organisms there, things such as disease, competition, predators, parasites, crowding, food availability. All of these things increase as your population increases. So they are dependent on the population numbers. You can have density independent factors. These are the type of things that it doesn't matter. Their effect is not going to increase if your density increases. Their effect is going to be the same. Temperature, storms, flood, drought, major habitat disruption, natural disasters, tornadoes, things like that. Human populations are a little bit different than the other organisms, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But demography is the study of human populations. We just study its size, its density, its distribution, its movement, birth rates, and its death rates. Why do human populations grow differently than populations of other species? They do because we have the ability to change to our environment or change our environment. We can get our own housing, we can get our own clothes. We have medical technology and innovation that allows us to live longer and earlier in life. We have technology that allows us to produce more food and clean water. We have health care for our young and our old. All of this are things that we have control over that can control our human population. Things like diseases can come along, but then we can find medical advances to help with those such things. To be able to calculate the population growth rate, there are 4 things that we need to understand. First is birth rate. Birth rate is the number of live births per 1,000 in a population. Next is death rate. It's the opposite of that. It's the number of deaths per 1,000 per year. Immigration is I for in. It's the number of individuals moving into a population. Immigration is exit, the movement of individuals out of a population. Knowing all of these will help us calculate our growth rate. We take our birth rate and our immigration, which would be all the organisms that are there, add them together. You take your death rate and your immigration, all the organisms that are leaving, and you subtract them, and that gives you your population growth rate. If your growth rate is 0, then that means the number of organisms coming in and the number of organisms leaving are going to be about the same. It does not mean that all of a sudden numbers just stop. All right? Your population is stable at this point, but you still have organisms coming and going just at about the same rate. If your rate is above 0, we have our population is growing. If our rate is below 0, our population is shrinking. Doubling time is the time that it takes for our population to actually double in size. The next thing and the last thing that we're going to talk about are age structure graphs. You need to know and understand these graphs for our test. These are graphs that represent the different proportions of a population. It will tell us the number of males, tell us the number of females. It will tell us the numbers within different age groups, and it's broke down from youngest to oldest. These are really important because they can help us predict what's going to happen to that population in the near future. Here are 3 different types of those graphs. First is our rapid growth, makes kind of a J-shaped. So if you see this, you're going to recognize it right away as rapid growth. These are our slow growth charts, a little J but not that big. And these are our zero growth. They decrease going down each side. You need to know these 3 and you need to be able to recognize them, especially for your test. Okay, so that wraps up our Chapter 4 notes. Good luck on your test, and I hope this helps you.